And the other end of the phone goes dead silent, awkwardly. And Tim goes, man, dude, I'm really sorry. And I was like, that's righteous, He's like, because in the 80s, I listened to a lot of Pantera really loud, and I cannot hear myself talk. And so I speak really loudly because it's the only way I can hear myself talk. And so if you thought I was yelling at you this whole time, I really didn't mean to, and I'm so sorry. Every single individual has a story to tell, and they're great stories that need to be heard.
I want every listener to know they have the ability to change the world.
Welcome to the 1720 Podcast.
What's up, Mountain Movers? Welcome back to the 1720 Podcast. Going to lay out the next few weeks for our listeners here. This week we got Stewie and I, where we have a rare treat and opportunity where Stewie's kind of sitting in the guest seat with an agenda and some principles and a little preppy that he's got put together.
Well, I did it for something else. I'm just copying and pasting, but yes, prepared today.
Yeah, it's a treat. I'm on the other side. I'm like, this is going to be awesome. Next week, we're going to take off for America Week, 4th of July. I think the 3rd is Monday, and then Tuesday's the 4th. So
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and take that week off, and then the following week, we're bringing our friend Sean Surface on. He has an incredible story. He's doing several things in ministry, second chance mentorships where pours into children. He runs a couple gyms. They're shooting a VH1 crime story show or season about his story.
Oh my.
That recently shot in LA, and they have actors for it and everything, so he's not self-acting in it, but that's the type of story we'll be bringing to the table for this. And I don't even know the full story. I cannot wait to hear it because I know he's a changed man from that story, and he's leaning into a God-given purpose. And so super excited about that. But today, Stewie's got the agenda.
Yeah, so I previewed it a little bit last week as we introed the replay for the April episode, but or the episode with April. But a little background here. So there's a guy in the office who he probably doesn't want the credit, but he texted me one day and it's like, hey, tell me, 18, 19, 20 years of being a lawyer, tell me like how you've acquired all of your powers of persuasion or something, just sort of silly like this. And I was like, well, I don't really know, man, but I'll be back at the office in 30 minutes. Let's sit down and talk about it. And so I got back to the office. He came in and sat down. And then I just started talking, just thinking and brainstorming. And I've learned, I didn't have a whiteboard at the firm, but I have one in my office here, and I've learned to love the whiteboard. And so I just start like talking about things and whiteboarding things out, which eventually turned into like this list that's sitting in front of you there is like the 12 big things.
Of persuasion.
Yeah, but it turned into just things, right? So some of them, as we get through them, you'll be like, that doesn't really relate to being persuasive, but it relates to communicating well, or it relates to like managing, I'll say projects like little P projects, like things you're working on, stuff like this. And so then fast forward, 6-8 weeks or so, and Fisher reached out to me. He was like, hey, do you have a minute that you could come speak to, our team over at Woodhouse? I was like, sure. What do you want me to speak about? Because, I've done it before. We talked about legal topics and lien rights and all sorts of different stuff. And he was like, anything, like whatever you got on the top of your mind, here's who the group is, and anything that you think would be helpful for them would be excellent. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try this. Right. So I took, at the time I had whiteboarded all of it. I took pictures of my whiteboard because I was like, maybe I'll go back to this. And so then I took those pictures and reduced it down to this talking points memo that you have in front of you. And so then walked through it with his team, and I think the feedback was pretty good. And in fact, Fish reached out later and said, hey, we had a meeting where somebody brought up one of your things off of your 12 things list, and the meeting is actually very helpful.
Worth the talk.
So
there it is.
It was worth it. And so I was like, I had the thought, if it was helpful there, maybe it's helpful here.
Totally.
So let's talk through it. And so this will come cold to you, and it's conversation pieces. And I will say out loud here, if you, Kevin, you disagree with them, you're like, man, I don't know if that's right or not. Challenge it. Like, let's talk through it, because this is a working theory. This is a working model. And listeners, as you hear things and you think, oh, I actually have a different perspective on something like that, reach out to me. Like, leave a comment on wherever you find us. Because again, working model, working theory, these are generalized talking points to build this framework. So
Eddie just posted, maybe you saw it yesterday, I just pulled it up. A new study shows that it's okay to have different opinions than someone and still be friends.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the point you're getting
That's
across.
absolutely right. And, I'll go on a little diatribe here is that I think one of the things that's lost in America in the last 5 or 6 years is our ability to dialogue.
Big time.
You're either right, you're either with me or you're wrong. And if you're wrong, then I'm going to kill you. And if you're with me, like we're ride or die. And I'm all about like being with you and I'm all about being ride or die, but there's the dialogue to just say, hey, I have a different perspective. I disagree with that, and that's okay. You don't have to hate me for it. This isn't that divisive, but the point being,
you're really teeing it up. Like, what is coming? What is on this list?
You should communicate well with your project partner. No, but it's not that divisive. But I'm interested in hearing what everybody says about it, and continue to hone this down as being something that I can put on my desk and think through and talk through and coach and lead and all that sort of stuff. So, without further ado.
I see summary of the 12 things, and the first one, top left, why.
Boom.
And that's dumb to start with why.
That is completely dumb. It's not important. Why would we start there, right? It's a slightly different pitch than know your why, like the grand scheme why, because remember the conversation started with teach me your powers of persuasion, right? Like that sort of thing. And so I started here. This was actually number one on the board was why. Because I have found that if I don't understand the way you're thinking about something, it's very difficult for me to convince you that you're wrong or that I'm right or to make progress, right? You end up in this spot where everybody's yelling at each other, but nobody's moving. And so I started with why because I think it's important to ask that question. And so you see here, the ideas I had is why is he mad? Well, I need to know why the person I'm communicating with is frustrated so that I can have empathy for the frustration, I can resolve the frustration, I can speak to the frustration, etc. Why are we doing this? Why are we not X? And the sort of takeaway from that idea of starting with why is you cannot solve a problem. You cannot persuade someone to move to your position. You can't move the needle if I don't understand the why. And I don't think that's particularly controversial, but I think it's important to have front of mind as you're having conversations, you're trying to talk through issues and problems.
I think people call keen. If you go before a public speaking opportunity, what is the heart here? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
What is the purpose behind this? You're going into that interaction with some intentionality rather than just winging the conversation.
Yes.
So there's intentionality with starting there.
And I can remember, speaking of the public speaking overlay, I can remember a very specific time where I pivoted away from just showing up and winging it. Have we had this conversation? Mm-hmm. It might have been with Fisher that day. There was a YCC meeting, and it was after I had YCC'd out, but somebody asked me to come back and speak just on the value of the YCC. And I was like, I've been doing this forever. Just wing it. And took the mic and just started talking. And when I got finished, I was like, I went nowhere.
Yeah, you lost the crowd because of babbling, maybe.
Yes.
You went off in ditches.
Yes.
And if you're intentional, you're like, these people are here for a reason. They need to hear the opportunity that's before them.
Yes.
And you just, boom, you laser that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even if I only talk for a minute and a half, I want it to count.
Yes. And that was probably many other times before that I had given it the old wing it and see what happens approach that landed flat too. But that was the first time I was self-aware enough to be like, oh, you got to at least figure out why you're up here talking.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So in any event, start with the why for the purposes of understanding. Because if you don't understand, if you don't know why, you can't solve. So
are we reading this like a book, or are we going column 1, column 2?
I was going to go column 1, column 2, but I'm super freestyle, man.
Hit it with bubbles and buckets.
Okay, so bubbles and buckets is like a crazy way to say a long form things. So I'll start with, as I have a tendency to do, a short story. I'll tell it as long as possible. I in a previous life was engaged with the national AGC doing a presentation for their one of their up and coming leader forums, and they would have all sorts of people come talk, financial consultants, project, everything. And me and Barry Brooks, podcast episode, Barry Brooks would go and talk about legal overlay. They would talk about generally dispute resolution. And there are two big points that we would hit in there. But one of the bigger ones was this idea of solving problems while they're small so that they don't get big and become unsolvable. And so I'm calling it bubbles and buckets because you either want to keep them in bubbles or you want to put the issues in buckets, but don't let them come together, right? And so I'll give an example, like a hypothetical example of, like, let's just say you have a project that you're working on, and I'm capital P project, like a construction project, and you have an issue with respect to a little bit of defective work, an allegation of some defective work. You have some change orders that haven't been resolved. They're just out there lingering. And then the project is running 2 weeks behind, right? So now we have 3 issues that if we wait until the end, like the emotional overlay, the issue overlay makes it almost impossible to solve. Whereas if you just, at the moment, you just tackled the alleged defective work issue, like, oh, you're right. You know what? We should have used number 2 pencils and we used HB pencils. And so it's not as dark. I'm completely making this up, right? But it's not, the lines aren't as dark and you're right. Can I fix it now? And it makes solving the other issues easier because you've reached in and solved the issues. You've kept the issues in their buckets and you've solved them small so that they don't get big and become unresolvable. And you think about that in the context of subject matter or money, right? Like if you have 5 or let's say 10 $10,000 problems, well, now you have a huge problem, but you could solve them one off and make them easier. So the whole point of that is resolve the easy things. Don't wait, don't delay. In the process of doing that, keeping your bubble small or your bucket small help you find common ground and resolve what could be big problems.
Yeah, don't sweep it under the rug either.
Oh, man.
How many times do we have to coach people? Like the vulnerability behind mistakes being made, let's flush it out now, because if the client ends up telling me 2 months down the road, oh, it's much bigger, we could have done something about it 60 days ago. Now it's just defense. There is no offense you can play whatsoever.
Well, and I don't know, there's no mathematics to this, but I would say overwhelmingly so, not resolving something doesn't make it go away.
No.
It usually makes it worse. It usually makes it compound. It usually makes the buckets and bubbles bigger. And then someone else, down the road can't solve a huge problem because you didn't just say, hey, man, I think we ordered the wrong pencils.
Yeah.
And solve it then.
I don't have the capacity to do this. Therefore, it's not going to be done if we don't address it, rather than I just didn't get to it.
Right.
Because not getting to it has schedule ramifications a few weeks, months later.
Right.
Bigger problem then.
Bigger problem. So the point of that is that little nugget there is keep the bubble small, keep the buckets little, resolve easy things, quickly find common ground so it doesn't become so big you can't fix it. The next one's called, the title of this one's Focus on You. And when I say you, I mean like inwardly focused, like focusing on yourself. And the issues that I was trying to tackle there was understanding what your triggers are, what your tendencies are, what your hangups are, etc. And so the notes I made there are like saying, I work best when, right? Or can you send that to me so I can look at it? Because you know this, Kevin, I'm a long processor. Mm-hmm. So if we just start rifling ideas, usually what I do is either catalog them or write them down. And we did it before we started recording today. I was
I'm smiling.
Yeah.
And I knew exactly how to present it to you. Not for persuasion, just because of how you're wired.
Right.
We do not need to solve this today. Chew on it.
Right.
Let me know what you think. We got time.
That's right. And so, but having that understanding of the person you're speaking with, but I think for your own self is insanely helpful because it's easier to say, like, can you send that to me? Can we circle back on that than to try to tackle something in a moment that's outside your comfort zone? And I'm using a little example there to illustrate a big point. But if you use data to drive your decision making process, acknowledge that. Say, hey man, I just really need to see the numbers on this. Like I know you're saying, oh, it's easy and it's just a couple of whatevers, but I really need to see the numbers on this to make a good decision. Can you send that to me, please?
Yeah.
And understanding how you're wired, how you'd make decisions, is insanely helpful. And the other thing is focus on you means listen first. Like it says here, repeat what you heard and respond, but even maybe later. And you hear this in like marriage counseling sort of circles and everything, but repeating back to people what you heard just to make sure we're communicating clearly. Like, okay, Kevin, what I heard you saying was that we have a couple of issues that need to be resolved. And the way I've recorded them is that, we have the wrong density of pencils, and we also need to work on those 2 change orders. Are we saying the same thing right now?
Yeah.
And it feels real marriage counseling, but you would be surprised how many times when I was at the firm, we would be working on something and you would see an email and you would see the response and Ian commonly was sitting across the desk and we were like, ships passing in the night.
Yeah.
Like these two bros have no idea that neither one of them are talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
And so just level setting that around the idea, focusing on you, making sure you understand, making sure you know what your decision matrix looks like, etc. Game changer.
So Sadie, what you're saying is if I don't load this dinner plate into the dishwasher tonight, you're going to break it over my head. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah. Did I pick that up right? And she's like, yes, you did hear that correctly.
Yeah.
And you're like,
I'm just going to make her listen to minute 15.
Yeah. And then buy plastic plates. Yeah. Good luck breaking that one. Okay. Next one is filter to relevant. Man, how many times have you been in a conversation with someone and you get to the end and you're like, I have no idea what we're talking about. Right. And you're just like, yeah. You're like, well, what are you trying to tell me? And so that goes two different directions, right? It goes in the outbound communication, but it goes to the inbound communication too, in terms of filtering to relevance. Like my experience would say 10 minutes of someone talking at you usually equals about 1 minute of them telling you something that's important. And you need to be able to listen to everything, but then filter to what's important. Identify what is important in that conversation and identify what's just chatter and smoke and uncomfortable conversation point. Right. So being able to take that. And so commonly at the firm, I would say clients would call in and it's no slight to clients, but they didn't know what I needed to know. And so I would just say, tell me everything. And we would spend 30 minutes and then I would get to the end of the conversation. I'd taken 3 notes and written down 1 to do. Right. Because I knew that they didn't know what I needed to know, but I can't just ask the laser beam questions, tell me X, because there's probably context around it that's important that may have something relevant in there. So the point of that all is like, there may be long conversations, there may be attenuated issues, there may be stuff you get to the end of it and you're like, golly, we talk forever. But there is a super skill in being able to filter that down to what's relevant. Because once you figure out what's relevant, or stated differently, perhaps why you're talking about it, then you can fix it, or then you can begin solving it or communicating effectively about it.
And I think it goes back to being prepared, right? That last comment. People talk a lot to cover up what they don't know.
Oh, yeah.
You're long-winded when you didn't prepare because you're just rambling, or exact opposite, you completely freeze up and get nothing over.
Yes.
Don't wing it. Don't mail it in. Especially if you're going into a crucial conversation, be prepped.
That's good. That's great outbound communication advice, but think about it from an inbound communication advice too, where you get on the phone and you know the guy doesn't know and you're just chattering all over the place. And you're like, why are we talking about that? That's not just having an understanding that chatter may not be relevant. That chatter may be chatter for something else. And as having the skill to take in all that inbound communication and again, filter it back to what's relevant. Why are we talking about this? What are we talking about? How, that sort of thing. So,
and when you're listening to that sort of thing, let's say you're leading a group or a company, whatever the case may be, if that's one of the people on your team, you can decipher that they're long-winded because they don't know and they're not prepared. And then not in front of the group, but solo, you're going to ask them to be more prepared for the next meeting.
Right.
Because you just circled the wagon. We didn't get anywhere.
We didn't get anywhere. Right. All right. Next one is be in and out of the details. And so the idea here is that, and people will be like, no, I don't need to be in the details, whatever, my position doesn't require it. But my experience was that I needed to, irrespective of what the issue was, I needed to be comfortable enough deep into the weeds so that I could live cleanly and effectively at a high level. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I can't tell you what the thesis of the book is if I haven't read the book, right? So I need to have looked at all the pages so that I could then synergize it effectively and live at 30,000 feet on the issue. And if challenged at 30,000 feet and say, well, look, this change order, 31R, that wasn't related to RFI 271. And you're like, well, actually it was, because you know what I'm saying? And then could zoom down quickly. So always live in and out of the details. But the killer idea there, to me, the communicative idea, the persuasive idea, the credibility idea is knowing when to be in and out of it. Because I'm sure you've been in conversations with people who only can live at 30,000 feet, and you're like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Like every time I ask him, he doesn't know which change order we're doing.
Yeah, my job's 30,000, not yours.
Yes.
I need you to report to a 30,000 level to me.
Right.
So you need to know it.
Yes.
5,000.
Or the inverse of that is you need to know, like you're in a conversation with somebody and it's just all details. It's all weeds. When in reality, I just need the 30,000 foot. Like, that's cool. Be in the weeds. Give me the Twitter summary of the issue, man. And so having the capability of being both in and out of the weeds, and the capability to know the person you're communicating with, do they need to be in the weeds or out? And having like just this 4-dimensional flex around that issue. I don't know that it's a persuasive skill, but it's definitely like a high level, high aptitude communication skill to be able to do all of that. So that's what is that? The 5th point, 6 points, something like this.
We're on number 6.
6. Here we go. Assess. So number 6 is assess strengths and weaknesses. And the idea here is identifying what your strengths and weaknesses are and what their strengths and weaknesses are. And I use the word leverage. It sounds like manipulative, but like using your leverage or their leverage to accomplish something, right? So I don't know what you're really good at, and you don't know what I'm really good at. But if I did have an understanding of that, then I could play into those strengths or against those weaknesses to try to accomplish the end that I'm trying to accomplish, or perhaps some sort of mutual accomplishment of the goal, right?
Yeah.
So, but I can't do that if I don't have a really good assessment of what you're good at and what I'm good at. So think, here we go, basketball reference. Think NBA Finals. Boy, you don't think those teams were assessing what the Denver Nuggets were really good at and what the Miami Heat were really good at and what we weren't good at and what they weren't good at for purposes of putting together a winning game plan? You better believe it, right? They had people putting that together for weeks leading up to it so that they could develop a winning game plan.
And it's still happening. It's immediately after the finals.
Yeah.
The whole league's taking notice that nobody can guard Joker. Mm-hmm. So they're starting to already trade and swap and move draft picks around because they need to restructure before the Nuggets just taking a run with it because nobody can cover that guy.
Right. And so you're like, all right, I saw how the finals played out, who had effective coverages against him. How do we leverage our trade assets to go get someone who can apply those effective coverages against him? It is 4-dimensional chess going on out there.
Yeah.
So you need to know those things so that you can develop a winning game plan that does kind of go to you're persuasive a little bit. The other example there, and I don't know, this 100% makes sense. There's a book I can't think of the name of right now. It's called David versus Goliath. Who wrote it?
The Bible.
No, that's not specifically about all of that. Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote the book, and it really speaks to this issue. But if the specific example is if David had put on all the armor and tried to lug that sword out there and give Goliath a go in his strong areas, David would have been massacred. But instead, he looks back and says, no, I can't play the game the way he plays the game. But if I play the game this way, it plays into a humongous weakness of his, and we know how this story ends. So think about all those opportunities in like your David versus Goliath scenario. Not that you're necessarily the weaker, lesser equipped, but think about it from the perspective of how do I utilize my strengths against your weaknesses for purposes of accomplishing a battlefield victory.
Yeah, whether it's competitive or alignment.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. Okay, so what are we to here? Well, this is 7. I should have numbered them. If there's 12 things,
top right.
Top right.
Top right it up, bruh.
So this one, I titled this one "Have Right," RIGHT in quotes, collateral, and really this kind of goes to the idea of if you're always right, then you're going to garner the assumption that you're right on this one also, right? So if you come from a place of honesty, truthfulness, accuracy, data, whatever. And so every time you have that conversation with somebody, they're like, man, every time I get into a pricing scenario with Kevin, I challenge that point and he has all the backup and he's always right. It's happened the last 5 times. And on the 6th time it happens again, guess what I don't ask for? I don't ask for the backup. I don't ask. Kevin's always right. You have in that scenario, you have right, RIGHT, collateral. Every time he says X, it must be true. Therefore, when he said X this time, it's true.
Yeah.
And you have to work hard to develop that right collateral. It comes in the form of being trustworthy. It comes in the form of like doing what you say, all those things. But having right collateral helps you be persuasive in those moments when you need to utilize that, right? It makes me think about Bolden said it. Brian Bolden said it on episode 4, whatever it was. I think it was the opening quote. It was, have enough leverage in the room, but never have to use it.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. It speaks to that. So that have right collateral, number 7.
My thoughts immediately went to like one of the downfalls of leadership. Even if you're a well-intended leader, that like my opinion doesn't mean, just because it's my opinion doesn't mean it's right. Poke holes through it.
Yeah.
Like Jeff Parsons, call BS. Like I want you to do that because I'm not. I'm just willing to throw ideas out there. I want to hear yours.
Right.
Yours are most likely better.
Correct.
And unfortunately, it's few and far between when you can get that. Like, no, I think we need to go this direction.
Right.
And I crave that,
Yeah, that's the vulnerability, the corporate buy-in, all of those things have to exist for that phenomenon to exist. Because I've been guilty of like, I'm not raising my hand because I don't want to be told I'm wrong. I just prefer to just know I'm right and not say something.
Yeah, it's like Captain Doofus keep running down his crusade.
Yeah, right. Okay, number 8, chameleon is how I titled this one. And this is a tricky one. If anybody gives any feedback on it, it might be this one. The gist of the idea is that people like to work with people like them, right? People like to work with people like them. And so I'm not suggesting that you become like someone else for the purposes of like compromising your morals or doing something unethical or leaning too far to one side of a line. But man, if I know that you love bow hunting, well, then when I call, I'm going to ask, have you been bow hunting lately? Right? Like I'm going to express an interest in what you like. I'm going to, and not like feign interest, not be fake about it, but I know you like bow hunting. You know what? I'm going to read up on it a little bit. And I'm going to say, hey, I actually, when we last talked, I went and read an article about it. They have this new like tip. Have you seen these? Oh yeah. Have you, right? And so just figuring out what people like, the way people like to operate, the things that they're into, remembering their kids' names. Like when we get stuck in a conversation, I was like basketball most of the time. Everybody knows that. So most of the time when people come up to talk to me, they're like, dude, did you watch the NBA Finals? I'm like, oh, yes, right? Like I want to talk to that person because I love basketball. Everybody knows I love basketball. We talk about basketball. And so just using that opportunity to learn more about people, to connect yourself more deeply with the person, to understand what makes them tick or what that sort of thing. And then not becoming like them, but becoming interested in those things. That helps from a persuasive perspective because it begins to connect you closer together. And so, when I call, I'm not calling to yell at you. We're going to talk about bow hunting just a little bit. And then actually I need to work this thing out. Can you help me work this thing out? No, I work this thing out, blah, blah, blah. Moving on, right?
Yeah.
And it's not so much persuasive as it is about people, but having that relationship that's yoked a little bit more differently than black and white and email exchange helps drive outcomes. And so think about that. Think about, who the people you're dealing with, working with, interacting with, et cetera, how they operate, the things they like to do. Ask questions and I'm not saying become like them, but like lean into those things for purposes of developing a relationship, period, full stop. If you have that relationship with them, it helps drive outcomes.
Yeah. And you have a huge caveat there without compromising what you stand for.
Right.
So it's like there's certain foundational items that you're not going to bend on, but meeting somebody in the middle just makes that relationship that much better. And that's what's so special about our industry.
Right.
Like we have a board meeting or we have this function and the primary duty is X, but we talk about life.
Right.
And that's what makes that bond that much greater.
Right. And it makes doing business that much easier.
Dude, totally.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one's a super lawyer point. Create a paper trail.
Yeah.
And everybody's just like, oh my gosh. Like
click.
Switching over to that other podcast. Everybody hates this. Everybody hates this. I used to do full 2-hour over lunch seminars on project documentation because it is, from a litigation perspective, from a dispute resolution perspective, it's so important, right? If it didn't get written down, it probably didn't happen. That moniker is true. And so it's important. It's really important. But I think what's also important is doing it in a way that is not divisive or destructive to the relationships that you have on the jobs or with whatever, right? And so the point of that create a paper trail is to emphasize doing it, but to give a few examples of how to do it in a way that's not like super duper cringy.
Yeah.
So here are a few of those examples. Daily notes and daily logs. Everybody hates it. Do it. Get a journal, pin it for your work, write keep a journal, because you can't. I will literally dozens of times an issue came up in a case, and the only evidence that our position even ever was brought up was in a journal for some guy who's like, oh yeah, I took a note of that when we talked. And you flip back there like, oh yep, July the 14th, 2000, whatever. Here it is. Talked with Kevin regarding change orders. He agreed to process number 9 and number 10 has a pricing exercise.
Does that hold up?
Yes, because it's a contemporaneous recordation of the conversation that you had. So you can use it to refresh the recollection of the witness. You can use it as evidence that the conversation actually happened. I can't force it on you. Like, Kevin, you said this. Look, it's in this journal. But I can utilize that as a contemporaneous recording to help bolster the idea that it existed in the first place.
And I call that the 6-month rule in business. Like, I know this is fresh and hot today, but you're going to be involved in several other projects. 6 months from now, you're going to have a hard time remembering this.
Oh, yeah.
Trust me. We're all at capacity, like all that sort of stuff. Just write it down. Get a confirmation. The 6-month rule to that general contractor being a specialty contractor, like if they approved that change order and then told you on a phone call, just follow up in an email.
Yeah.
Because they might forget 6 months from now that they released you, genuinely.
Right. So they actually there's a CYA like follow up with an email tip here, right? Because that's a great
Cover
tip
your area.
Cover your area, yes. But the CYA email, when it comes out of the blue, does nothing but make people mad, right? Like, you hang up the phone,
totally,
and you know that bro's going to send me an email immediately, like, following our conversation, I would like to document the idea that we just, right? Like, you hate that.
Yeah, when it's the lead off.
Yes,
it's an unpinned grenade,
and it's an unpinned grenade. And so the comment that I had there, or the idea that I've used a lot of times, is the conversation will wrap up, I'll just say, hey man, do you mind if when we hang up I just send an email just so we're on the same page about this?
Have to have it. It's part of our policy.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great idea, actually. Yeah. Have it as part of policy. Just want to give you a heads up, I'm going to do it. And they'll be like, oh yeah, it's fine. It's a great idea. We probably need that for the file. And then you say, hey, just follow up our conversation, blah. And he gets the email and he thinks, oh yeah, this is exactly what he said he was going to do. Yeah. Right? There's no hand grenade here. Just a homeboy doing what he said he was going to do. No big deal. So, but that's 2 sentences at the end of a conversation that changes everything. So think about that. Like, you do need to document it. Sometimes you do need to send the CYA email, but you can do it in a way that doesn't make everybody mad and hate you.
And I don't want to rabbit trail this too hard, but that one principle is what you came and spoke to my team about a couple years ago. And it was shaking them a little bit. And it was like, have a paper trail, but also be careful what you're putting in writing.
Oh, yeah.
The opposite side of that. And you went into some detail, and you were a chameleon meeting us. You weren't talking to lawyers. You were talking to a bunch of construction folks. So you were able to present it in a way that was impactful. So it matters no matter what industry you're in.
Well, and I'm going to come out of that rabbit hole and then come back into it, because the next point under this create a paper trail was generate some internal memo, right? That is also a paper trail. It's derivative generally of like a journal entry or something, but you can identify or advise stakeholders of some a conversation that happened by generating an internal email and memo. By memo, I mean email. So you have a conversation with Brad about his donkeys and stuff.
Oh, freaking Brad.
Is it donkeys or mules? I forget.
He's a mule rider.
He's a mule rider. So I had this conversation with Brad about his mules and breeding mules and stuff and all this. I hang up the phone. Hey, Kevin, just wanted to let you know I talked to Brad today. We talked a lot about his mules, and they're going to be here on time. Yeah. Whatever, right? Send. I've advised the internal stakeholder of something that you needed to know at a high level. I've created a document trail that I had that conversation with him, right? That's a double check. Here's the problem, is that's a good thing. Now here's we go back into the rabbit hole. That's a good thing, right? Like, I've created that paper trail that the conversation exists in case we ever need to deal with it or ever have any question about approval. You can say, well, no, here's how I know it was approved, because I said in that email, I talked to Brad 15 minutes ago. He said that he had the mules, and that's how I know I had that conversation with him. That's discoverable. That's admissible. That's relevant. But so is I talked to Brad. He's a complete dummy. I hate that guy. And I feel like we should do anything we can on this job to bury that guy's sin.
Yep.
Also discoverable.
Yeah.
Also relevant. Also will be thrown up on the air quotes on the Elmo. Also, you're going to have to answer questions about that email too. So don't feel like just because it's internal, it's not discoverable.
Could you imagine if our text exchange ever got discoverable?
It'd be like all the GIFs will not load. It'd just be like red X, red X, red X.
Perfect.
Red X. Yeah.
That's all right. We're safe.
Yeah, we're safe. Also, attorney-client privilege? Is that? I don't know.
Used to be.
Yeah. Okay, so create a paper trail. We spent a lot of time on that. Here's one final note, though, on creating a paper trail is sometimes when you have to like dig a little bit on the paper trail, that is to say, like you have to send the email you don't want to. I think it's important to articulate why you're sending it and the consequences of a failure to act, right? This RFI is holding this. It needs to be answered. We need this information. If you just say period there, like that just lives in a vacuum. But if you say we need this information, period, if we don't get this information by X date, then it is going to slide the dates for which we can order. And if the dates we can't order aren't hit by this, then you see what I'm saying?
Oh, dude, it's lightning and thunder.
And so when you do that
in Discovery,
yes, right. So now all of a sudden it's like, well, you were supposed to have be completed by June the 15th, weren't you? Well, yeah, but look here.
What did Mike Bassett say?
I don't know.
Semicolon, however.
Semicolon, however. Yeah. Semicolon, however. I told you 16 months before that if we missed this deadline, there was no way, and it was on your desk, and here are the consequences, and lo and behold.
I told you 13 straight weeks that this was a problem.
Right. And so passing along information, doing the little CYA dance, helpful, but also there's one step further that I think really bolsters all of it, which is articulate the why and the consequences. Okay, moving on. 3 more. We got time. Look at this. We're killing it. This is the wrong title for this one. I called it decision leading. I have to think of a new title here, a new working title. But from a persuasive perspective, there's a jury consultant theory, right? So if I'm down at the courthouse, I'm trying a lawsuit. I'd never, as much as I can avoid telling the jury what to think, the better, right? Lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. And so if I can tell you all of the facts that you need to know, that would lead you to conclude the point that I want you to conclude, but then let you come to that conclusion on your own, I win, right? And so that's decision leading is what I've called that too. I'm going to lead you to the decision and then you make it.
Yeah.
That's hard. It's tricky. It's a super sophisticated technique. But if you can decision lead, you will crush because people love their own ideas, right? So if you have a problem, you can, hey, here's 2 or 3 solutions. I've thought through this one. This one's not a good one. This one, here's a few things. And then this one, here's blah, 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 blah. And you get to that conversation and you want number 3 to be the answer. And they say, well, number 3 sounds great. Be like, you know what? I was sort of leaning towards number 2.
Yeah.
But now that you've said number 3, makes a lot of sense. I think we should go with that. Great idea, Kevin.
And I think that's that tightrope walk between manipulation and influence.
Absolutely.
Like it's sometimes a gray area.
Well, manipulation would suggest that I'm misleading you or I'm telling you facts that aren't true, derivative of options 1 and 2, so that number 3 becomes the only option.
Right. You're influencing to the truth.
Yes. Whereas that's a good point. That's a good point of pushback. I am not advocating manipulating, lying, changing. I am advocating decision leading, where I'm going to give you all the information that is accurate and helpful for you to come to the decision that I want you to come to.
For sure.
And so when you say, man, number 3, and I say, hot diggity, number 3 is a great idea, we both just won.
For sure.
We both just won. So
that's create win-wins.
Create a win-win, lead the horse to water, let him drink. So the next one, this is 11. Man, this one might be a touch controversial too. Anger is insecurity. And I don't know if it's exclusively insecurity, but I have learned over the years that oftentimes anger is a mask for insecurity, ineptitude, something to this effect, right? The answer to the question we sort of started with, right? If we're solving for why, and the first hypothetical I gave was, why is he mad? And most of the time it is because he doesn't know what he's talking about. Most of the time he's mad because he doesn't know what to do. I'm just going to yell until something changes. And so typically, I wrestle with this as a practice of law, is anger is met with anger. You want to yell at me? I'm going to yell at you. You want to be frustrated? I'm going to be frustrated. You want to do something like that? I'm going to do something like that. But if you can capture that moment of saying, you know what? That anger is non-derivative of anything except misunderstanding, insecurity, ineptitude, or whatever, then you can start to fix it. And so the technique that I typically have used, I think successfully, is just identifying it, right? Just saying it what it is, just calling it out of the moment. It's like, man, I feel like you're yelling at me because you don't have a good understanding of the situation with respect to the outstanding change orders. Is that right? Is that why you're frustrated? Okay, let me back you through that then. Let's take it from the top. Let me give you all the information so that we can, in like calling it out and disarming it and helping resolve the insecurity, ineptitude, frustration, etc., is a game changer, I think. Now you run the risk of like, hey man, I feel like you're yelling at me because you don't understand what's going on, might also result in more yelling. But there has to be an artful way of disarming the anger, because I can't think of any time yelling at an official changed the call. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't work. Yelling doesn't work. I mean, it creates fear, and sometimes fear will momentarily change the behavior, but anger doesn't work. So if you can identify it and disarm it, then you can begin to create change. You can begin to persuade. You can begin to influence. You begin to create progress. And so anger is insecurity. Just know that.
Mm-hmm.
Have I told you my number one anger story about dealing with lawyers? A little side note here. I was a baby lawyer, and full of all of the emotions as a young lawyer, right? You got to figure out how you're going to cut your teeth. And it was a lawyer I was dealing with on their side. His name was Tim. I remember his last name. I won't say it here. Tim, every time he talked on the phone with me, home dude just was yelling at me all the time. I was a baby lawyer. I've been work practice for like 18 months. Tim calls, yells at me. Tim calls, the end of this. Yeah. Tim calls, yells at me. Tim calls and yell at me. And I was just like, man, I am not taking it from this guy anymore.
This is a great story.
So Tim calls, he yells at me. I had enough of it. And I gave him the full unadulterated version of 1997 Stewart as a lawyer that has probably ever been demonstrated. All of it, right? You've heard the long form version. I won't give it here. All of it. And the other end of the phone goes dead silent, awkwardly. And Tim goes, man, dude, I'm really sorry. And I was like, that's righteous, He's like, because in the 80s, I listened to a lot of Pantera really loud, and I cannot hear myself talk. And so I speak really loudly because it's the only way I can hear myself talk. And so if you thought I was yelling at you this whole time, I really didn't mean to, and I'm so sorry. And I was just like,
I'm going to go walk in traffic. Have a good day.
See if I can jump out this window and land in the bushes, because this is a total disaster right now. So in any event, don't do that. Don't act like Stewart did to Tim that day. But in any event, anger is insecurity. And then the last one, every time I say this out loud, somebody will be like, that's a zinger. And this doesn't really relate to persuasion at all. It's more of it's just an idea, is that email doesn't constitute completion, right? An email doesn't constitute completion. You're having sent an email is not evidence that you did your job, right? Hey, Kevin, did you get that waiver from the vendor on that?
Yes, I did.
Well, you're supposed to say I sent an email.
No, the email says, yes, I did.
What do you mean?
I thought I'm playing ball here.
No.
Because I said I did it, but I actually didn't.
Well, no, that's not. Okay, so rewind that. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
What I mean is, hey, Kevin, did you get that waiver from the vendor? I emailed Rebecca about it. That's not what I asked.
Yeah.
I asked, did you get I followed up with an email. I'll email him about that. It has turned into this idea. It's turned into this like moniker, that you did it. You didn't do it.
Yeah.
Maybe, have you tried calling? Have you tried swinging by their office? Like, having sent an email is not evidence of the completion of your job. You're not telling me you sent an email means nothing.
Yeah.
So I see what you're saying. I need to rephrase that one, because what you said is funny now that I've rethought what you said. But yeah, no, sending an email is not evidence that you did your job. Follow up, draw it to conclusion. If I need the waiver, I need the waiver.
Right.
You put it in my hands, or figuratively, put it in my inbox or whatever.
And again, playing on the other side of that, if you're sending that, don't send it to 16 people. Direct it to Brad. Hey, your mule is getting out of hand at the shop. You need to get the mule out of here.
Brad.
Not, hey, whole shop.
Man, okay, so this is not on the list, but what happens when there's an email directed like in the to line to 20 people and you're one of the 20?
That's out of hand.
Delete. This is not for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is bonus tip. Use the to and the CC lines strategically.
Yeah.
Right? Like this morning, for example, I sent an email. It was to some folks in accounting. I copied some of the stakeholders, right? But I sent it to the person I wanted action, and I addressed the email, Brad, comma, blah, 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 right? And so there's no question who's on the email and why. Like it was to Brad, and the CCs are to the stakeholders so that they know that we're working on that thing.
Yeah.
Don't, stop blasting people with emails.
Yes.
It's exhausting, man.
Stop replying all. It's a whole different episode.
Yeah.
Yes, I received this.
Oh my gosh. Hey, hot sports tip. Here's an extra double bonus is if you're using Outlook and you're on like the death spiral reply to all, you can actually right click that email, and buried in that context sensitive menu is a wonderful word called ignore.
Really?
Bro, you hit ignore, everything that follows goes to the trash.
Oh, I didn't.
No more reply to all hell. You just right click, ignore. See you later.
I'm in on that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Anywho, a couple bonuses there that really mean absolutely nothing, but that gets us to the end of like this summary of my 12 things that I've been working on. Again, working document, working ideas, just brainstormed off the top on my office that day.
But turns into a working manuscript?
No. That's the book writing is all you. The book writing is all you. But yeah, it's just interesting talking points, and there are a few nuggets in there, and hopefully somebody pulls one out and says, you know what, that's a great idea, or I'm dealing with that issue right now, or that is a great tip. I can see how that plays forward, and we need to solve these, whatever the case may be. And again, I will say 100 times out of 100, if you don't like one of them, text me and tell me, call me, shoot me an email, challenge one of them. That's great, because I feel like part of the dialogue of our the podcast has been just us all getting better together.
Yeah.
And so I would love to fix it. I would love to be like, oh, you know what? That's a great idea. Let's add that now. There's 13 or whatever the case may be. So if you see one, if you hear one you don't like, or you think we need to tweak it, or there's something else you'd add to the list, hit us up, wherever you can find us. I'd be interested in having that conversation.
And we'll still be friends.
Imagine that. We'll still be friends. So that kind of brings us, we did it 45-ish minutes, just the two of us.
Yeah. Happy 4th, everyone.
Happy
week
4th.
Off.
Yep.
And with old Sean.
Happy 4th with a week off. And until we see you guys next time with Sean, you guys stay out there and keep moving mountains.